Well, I asked the question as we began at 8:30, why Good Friday? Why Easter? Why was it necessary? Why have these two things going on in our Christian calendar, if you will? Well, the simple answer is, and you could probably guess, but I want to textually take us to the reason why. The first part of this is in Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2, God tells us, He said, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and to keep it. The Lord God commanded the man, saying, 'From any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat from it you will surely die.'" Now he's talking about a couple of things there. Adam and Eve were created. Adam and Eve were there, and they were in a perfect situation, a perfect environment. And he gave them one directive, one command: don't eat from this particular tree. They made a choice to eat from that particular tree, and in doing so, they're going to have the consequences that God said is going to happen come upon them, and that is they're going to die. Now, two things happened there. They will eventually physically die, which they did, and death has been a part of humanity ever since. But even greater than that is the fact that they had this death spiritually. In other words, they're no longer in that perfect environment. They don't have that nature in them that is of righteousness. It's something that's changed. In Romans chapter 3, we're reminded of this change. Paul's writing to the church in Rome, and he says this in verses 10 through 12. He says, "As it is written, there is none righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands. There is none who seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together they have become useless. There is none who does good. There is not even one." So sin came in. This death came in. And this death wasn't just physical. It was spiritual. And the scriptures teach us that spiritual death essentially is the separation from God. The perfect, holy, righteous, pure God can't be around anything that isn't like that. So because sin came in because of disobedience to God's directive, God's law, God's command, then we're all under that consequence, that penalty of sin. And that penalty of sin is separation from God for all eternity. His presence taken away. So why Good Friday? Why Easter? Well, as we think about that, Good Friday, obviously you can't have Easter and the resurrection of Easter if you don't have Good Friday, right? They kind of are a packaged thing. So the fact that Christ had to come, He lived, and He died, which is what we talk about and think about on the prospect of Good Friday, His death, leading up to His resurrection. Well, I want to walk us through that time frame. We're going to take a journey today in stages from Gethsemane all the way to the resurrection, all the way to post-resurrection appearances of Jesus. So we're going to start in Gethsemane, the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus was on His way to this time in His life. Up until this point, He has told the disciples, He's told the people, "It's not my time, it's not my time, it's not my time." Well, the time has come. The time has come for Him to go to the cross. The time has come for Him to do this. And we find that marked in the Garden of Gethsemane. He brought His disciples with Him. He went to the garden. He wanted to pray. He wanted to process through. He wanted to be in communion with His Father as this time is coming upon Him. And He goes to pray, and He asks His disciples, He says, "Come along with me, and you pray with me." And so this process He came in. He said, "You stay here and pray. I'm going to go over here and pray." He would go pray. An hour later, he'd come back and he found his disciples asleep. He did this on 3 different occasions on that night in Gethsemane. And then after the third one, he gave a warning to them that this is a problem. Sin's right there ready to overtake you. You have to be alert. You have to be on your guard. And through the process of this time in the garden, he's interacting with his Father. He's in that deep communion, and he's agonizing over what's about to come, recognizing that his authority, his Father who is in heaven, his authority said, this is the plan, this is what we're going to do, and Jesus said, that's okay. And at that moment, after that third time, Peter comes into the scene. Or not Peter, look at that. I messed that one up. Judas comes into the scene, and he announces to all the authorities that were with Judas who Jesus was. This was the time in which Judas was going to set Jesus apart, mark him apart, so they could arrest him in hopes that they're going to get rid of him once and for all. And so Judas comes in and he embraces Jesus, and he gives him that infamous kiss, and right then they knew exactly who they were to take custody of. And you can find this in Matthew and Mark and Luke, all the different things of the Garden of Gethsemane and the betrayal of Judas. And all that's transpiring here, this was all part of the plan of God. All part of the plan of God. Does that make sense? God planned it this way? I'm excited that God planned it this way because of my sin. If God didn't have this plan and I'm still in my sin, what's my prospect for the future? And it's not very good, is it? See, all of us in this room, like Adam and Eve, all of us in this room, we have missed the standard of God. The law of God. He has told us what His standard is. And we haven't achieved that in ourselves. That makes us guilty. Guilty, so we are dead spiritually. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 1, that we were dead in our trespasses and sins. That's our state as human beings coming into this world. And without Christ, without Good Friday, without Easter, we would be stuck right there. We'd be stuck in that eternal situation of being spiritually dead to God, unable to be in that relationship with Him, and ultimately unable to be in heaven with Him. But because of what Jesus has done, we're able to do that. So Judas comes, and he gives him the kiss. They arrest Jesus, and they take him away. Now keep in mind, this is in the middle of the night. This is in the middle of the night. What's about to happen in the life of Jesus, everything that happens from this point forward up until the time He's placed on the cross is illegal. From a legality standpoint, from an authority standpoint within the framework of how the law was supposed to work. So Jesus was arrested, taken into custody. He ends up going on trial 6 times. 6 times. He has 3 Roman trials. So 3 times he's going to have Roman trials, and 3 times he's going to have Jewish trials. It starts with the Jewish trials. He's going to go before the authorities, and they have this problem with Jesus. They've always had this problem with Jesus. They're the ones that concocted this plan to figure out a way that we need to get rid of Jesus. We need to get rid of Jesus. And so they have these trials, but they have a problem. They are unable to put Jesus to death at this point. So they have to have somebody else do it. Along comes the Romans. They're willing participants. So he now has been transferred into the authority of the Romans to go on trial so that they can find him guilty, and ultimately then they can put him to death. Again, all this is happening overnight, which illegal, you can't do it at night. 2, there's no legal counsel afforded to Jesus. So these things are illegal, but they're marching through these different things. But I want to draw your attention to 3 passages in the book of Luke. Luke chapter 23. So the Jews have been trying long before it got to this point to get rid of Jesus. Now they have the help of the Romans. They've passed Jesus off, and in hopes that they're going to be able to have him executed at their hands. So he goes before Pilate. He goes before the governor. But look what he says in verse 4 of Luke 23. Pilate, he says, he said to the chief priests and to the crowd, I find no guilt in this man. So his first Roman encounter, they find him not guilty. You drop down a little bit later in the same chapter in verse 14, and he says to them, you brought this man to me as one who incites the people to rebellion. And behold, having examined him before you, I have found no guilt in this man regarding the charges which you make against him. That's verse 14. But listen to what he says in verse 15. Not only did Pilate find him not guilty, but in verse 15 he says, no, nor has Herod. The king also says, he did not find him guilty of any of these things that are be worthy of death. That's what he says in verse 15. So Pilate said twice he's not guilty. Herod has said once that he's not guilty. You drop down to verse 22 in the same chapter. And he said to them the third time, why? What evil has this man done? I have found in him no guilt demanding death. Therefore, I will punish him and release him. So Pilate's plan up to this point, after these three declarations of innocence, or should say not guilty, by himself, and one declaration by Herod, not guilty, his plan was to just appease the crowd by abusing Jesus and then letting him go. But that's not what happened, is it? So this is all part of the plan of God. The plan of God for the Messiah, the promised Messiah that was testified in the Old Testament, prophesied in the Old Testament, to come forward. He has arrived, and he's now standing trial. But a little bit later, so in verse 22, we find a third time that Pilate says he's not guilty. Gets to verse 24, and Pilate pronounced sentence that their demand be granted. Pilate basically said at this point, okay, I'm going to give you what you want. I'm going to release Barabbas, and I'm going to have Jesus crucified. That's what you've been asking for. And we can spend a whole host of time and speculation as to what was going on socially within the climate at the time that kind of forced Pilate's hand. But I want to kind of circumvent all of that and have you go in your mind to the power and authority of God. This was his plan. The perfect lamb, which, by the way, just a few days beforehand was picked out. Because if you remember the Passover, remember on the 10th day, they had to pick out the lamb, and the lamb would be with the people until the 14th day when they would kill the lamb as the blood offering for their sin. That's what happened. On the 10th day, Jesus was picked by the Father. He was among the people until the 14th day when he's about to be crucified. This is all part of God's great and wonderful plan all the way from the beginning, and he orchestrates it all the way through, so it ties directly into all the things that he was doing with his people, even in the Old Testament. So after his judgment by Pontius Pilate, the Lord was beaten. The Lord was mocked, the Lord was spit upon, the Lord was hit in the face by the soldiers. You find that in Matthew 27. He was forced to carry his own cross through the streets of Jerusalem to the place called Golgotha. That journey he had from the judgment seat of Pilate, which is called the Praetorium, Jesus had to walk from that place to Golgotha with the cross on his back. That walkway is called the Via Dolorosa. That's what historically what they call it. Translated, it's the way of sorrow, leading to the place of death, the skull, Golgotha. And so Jesus was called, or was asked to put the cross and carry it, his own cross, his own form of execution, he had to carry with him. But because of all that happened to him, he was unable to do that. He fell under the weight of that cross. And so they brought someone from the crowd to carry the cross for Jesus. They walked together to this place called Golgotha, where Jesus was ultimately crucified. So what I want us to do, I'm not going to, Lydia's going to sing a song. And it's called the Via Dolorosa. And there's going to be some picture up here. Just this walkway. And I want you to think about this journey. What is going on in the mind of the people? And you have a whole host of things going on. You have the Jews who were, crucify, crucify, crucify. And now they got him walking there. And you can only imagine they might have been cheering. They might have been excited. They might have been, this is great. And you have a smaller group of people, much smaller group of people, who aren't quite sure what to make of all this. Not sure, is Jesus really the Messiah? Because if he is, he could change this. But let me ask you this. Could he change it? No, he couldn't. It's not the plan of God. He could not alter it. He had to go through with this plan. And he took that cross and he started down the Via Dolorosa. This journey from the Praetorium in Pilate's palace to where he's going to be executed. Lady's going to sing this song. Try to